Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm Andrew Daly and I'm delighted today to be joined by Patrick O'Connor, the founder and CEO of CLM provider Gatekeeper. Patrick, thank you and welcome.
Pleasure, Andrew. Nice to speak to you again.
Indeed. So this is part of a wider piece of research that we're doing into procurement software buying model. And Patrick's very kindly contributed. And I think he's got some fascinating insights to share because, as I said, Gatekeeper is a CLM platform, so they're not just selling to procurement, but a much wider audience. And I think that's where we'll start, Patrick. I think from your perspective, how do procurement teams typically approach buying CLM and other related digital solutions?
Well, Andrew, I think if we look at what they get right, obviously they're demonstrating back to the business that they know how to kind of buy and procure stuff, right? So it's important. So they're, super strong at diligence, kind of value-proof business cases, workflow mapping, cross-functional sign-off, which is really critical. But if we take kind of CLM, and I guess through this lens, kind of CLM is a unified CLM and third-party lifecycle management provider. So we look at kind of both sides of that kind of regulatory coin, if you like, both the contracts and the third parties. We see this same problem time and time again, is that people buy CLM in a legal silo, typically, the classic, built by lawyers for lawyers. And I think there are some verticals where that's okay, but I think for the vast majority of businesses, certainly regulated businesses, or what we call kind of compliance-centric businesses that really, need to understand who they're contracting with, need to understand if they're InfoSec approved, if they're the data they're managing, that they're in a good financial and cyber status. We really see, legal siloed CLM, or what we would more class as kind of legal tech solutions, as causing a major problem. Do they accelerate the end-to-end contracting process? Yeah, they absolutely do. But they also essentially accelerate the risk that they're introducing to the business. Because if you think about where does your regulatory scope come from, it comes from the signature phase, right? When you sign a contract with a new third party, you're either creating a new regulatory scope and you need to understand that vendor and their status and onboard them appropriately, or you might be expanding the status of a third party. So the classic would be you're buying consulting from Accenture, and then you buy outsourcing, where you're now dealing with personally identifiable information and so on. So, lawyers understandably are concerned with their part in the CLM journey and in the negotiation, minimizing risk. But ultimately, you're contracting with that third party, and the third party risk and the contract side are two sides of the same regulatory coin. So you really need to consider them together. And the concept, I think, that contracts equals legal is a disaster for the legal team and for the business. The legal team's like buried in low value kind of admin work, and the business really, these products and services are owned by different departments in the business, and they need to have a really active role and collaborate. And we always think that minimizing contract risk and maximizing value is a corporate-wide activity. So these siloed solutions, I think, are really can cause an organization a lot of challenges. And we see that time and time again, that they solve the problem in a legal silo, and then they understand actually this is a corporate-wide problem that we need to solve and we need to adapt. And that's really the strength of Gatekeeper, is unifying all of those teams around a single pane of glass.
Right. Okay. And so when you mentioned legal, you mentioned procurement, I'm sure there's other implications for sales contracts and other departments as well. When they get it right, the organizers that get it right, you think, okay, we're in a process here where they really understand this. What is it that they do that makes the difference, Patrick?
Well, I think I always say that an elegant solution is the result of a beautifully articulated problem statement. So I think that it's crucial for companies to really get very clear about the problems they're looking to solve. And I think in this kind of Gen AI, and I know we're going to come on to talk about that, Andrew, Gen AI and kind of agentic world, that's even more important, because essentially we're now looking at kind of delivering business outcomes rather than like software subscriptions necessarily. Yeah. So be really clear about the kind of problems you're trying to solve, how widespread they are across the business, the handoff between different departments, and really double down on kind of solving for that. We've all seen those kind of functional specs that get passed around department to department, and everyone sticks in there every feature they've ever thought of that they ever might need. And you end up with this horrendous document that typically goes to RFP, which is an interesting process in itself.
Indeed.
But you're kind of destined to fail at that point, right? When you're creating something that the scope is so wide. I think get really focused on what you're trying to achieve, and then set really clear, measurable metrics around that. So kind of from time to value, improved cycle time, reduce costs, minimize risk. Set expectations around what you're trying to achieve there, and then go on that journey with your partner in the kind of CLM space or other procurement platform, and make sure you're kind of keeping each other honest through that whole journey.
So when procurement leads the process, Patrick, compared to other functions like legal, do you find their buying process is uniquely rigorous? Does it sometimes create unnecessary friction at all?
I mean, I think it's rigorous where it really counts, Andrew. So, and where it matters. So, policy fit, auditability, understanding supply risks, data integrity. I think, friction really creeps in when you're dealing with too many kind of fragmented tools and kind of stage gates. And again, coming back to these kind of, functional specifications and documents can be really useful, but they can also kind of set the partnership up to fail if they're not, if the teams internally don't collaborate and agree and align on the kind of business outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and then set really clear, measurable elements around that. For us, it's all about unifying the supplier contract and risk spheres and bringing the whole company together in a single platform.
Right. Okay. And so when you see procurement teams do it really well, what do those teams do differently that enables them to buy well and adopt the technology more effectively? Can you give us examples of some really good practices, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to come back to the kind of the being really clear about what you're trying to achieve. I think when you partner with any technology provider, and we certainly look at it through that kind of framework of partnerships, we're interested in very long-term relationships with our clients. You're going to go on a journey together, right? And if you don't have a well-defined destination, then you can be guaranteed you're never going to get there from the off, right? So we see just too often than not, like, what does success look like? And if nobody in the project team collectively can answer that question, it's kind of like, well, where are we going and how are we going to get there? So I think it seems simple and it's not rocket science, but it can quickly look like rocket science if you get it wrong and overcomplicate things. And ultimately, you've got to be laser focused about what you're trying to achieve. Yeah,
indeed. And so, as we've touched on already, your solution spans several departments: procurement, legal being the obvious one, sales, and I'm sure compliance, particularly in those highly regulated sectors like FS, pharma, FMCG. Any other verticals you'd pick out that are particularly?
I mean, our main three are kind of financial services, obviously very compliance-centric organizations, big focus on fintech, life sciences in general with biotech, and what we call kind of growth businesses, so like software companies would feed in there. Strictly speaking, they're not regulated, but they care about regulations. They care about whether suppliers are ISO accredited and so on.
Yeah. And do you see different sort of buying behaviors if it's led by legal or sales or compliance versus procurement?
Yeah, I think procurement kind of understands that kind of unification story across vendors, contracts, and risks, right? They've got a pretty wide scope, across the entire business, and I think they see the impact firsthand of kind of silos within the business and the friction and the impact that can have. I mean, legal clearly buys, governance and negotiation qualities, and they're quite rightly focused on contract negotiation and risk minimization, which again is just that one small subset of the full contract lifecycle. And sales typically buys against cycle time, deal velocity, an easier kind of business case to prove there just on driving that kind of sales velocity. And the Gatekeeper advantage is that kind of single canvas to view all of these things across the business.
Yeah, indeed. And do you see a difference in the speed of the buying cycle? Say, for example, part of me thinks sales probably buys quicker than procurement. Is that do you see that much, or is that a misconception on my part?
I don't think it's a misconception, but I think it depends on the lens of the outcome. Like sales is fastest when they can remove blockers to revenue. And then there's a clear business case there. Procurement, really shows up and moves quickly when you can unify workflows and you've got that really ERP grade data integrity. And then legal goes fast when it's kind of audit ready and AI summaries and version control and all of that good stuff. mean, in a perfect world, you'd have a platform that does all of this in one, like Gatekeeper, right? But we see businesses when, you know, everyone's got their own. We want to align everyone across a kind of shared agenda, but of course, every single department has got their own kind of top three, and the key is trying to achieve each of those at the same time. But certainly, when you resonate with one of those key areas in those different departments, they'll certainly move quickly, and you can see that in the buying cycle.
Yeah, indeed. And I suppose it's rare you buy one of those departments is buying a tool like Gatekeeper in isolation. It's always a unification across it. Do you ever see that in isolation at all? Is that something that ever happens in your?
I think it depends on the scale of the business there, Andrew. You know, I think that at the enterprise there's an argument there for absolute best-in-class point solutions, and you know, they've got the IT teams and the business analysts and everything else to kind of glue all those solutions together. You know, certainly at the mid-market, you know, we've never seen a team that's been resourced enough to even handle the scale of the contract and third-party and vendor data they've got, let alone piece all these solutions together. So I think, you know, we are very heavily focused on kind of mid-market and upper mid-market. And in that sphere, you know, we're very much trying to say, look, we're going to solve 80% of the problems across all of these different departments with 20% of the overhead cost and complexity. And in that way, for a mid-market business, I think, especially because we see most companies coming from greenfield, right? You're literally still using spreadsheets.
Yeah,
that's such a radical move forward in their maturity cycle that trying to attempt to do anything, you know, further than that would be really challenging for them.
And one of the points of this research is to understand what procurement could do differently. Are there any behaviours or habits you see from the sales and legal teams, for example, when they buy technology that procurement could perhaps, you know, embrace to drive greater sort of collaboration across the organisation or to streamline buying processes? Because I think one of the big problems that we're highlighting here is that resources spent on both sides, both on the vendor and the procurement side, the time of these lengthy processes. And I think part of me thinks there could be costs taken out of both sides, and that could be a win-win down the line. So what could procurement learn from other areas, do you think, Patrick?
I think, you know, obviously it depends on, we see customers buying for a whole range of reasons, right? You know, they've had a renewal that's been missed, and someone up high, typically the CFO, has not been best pleased about that. That's been the kind of key driver. You can have things like towards the end of the year, people have got budget and they know this is a problem need to be solved. I think the best joint outcomes is where the customer is like super clear about what they're trying to achieve, and they've documented those down. It's almost like the scientific method, right? You've got a hypothesis of these are the business benefits across kind of risk, revenue maximization, cost minimization. And then you go on that joint journey together, and then you measure against that, and you can see how you're progressing as the relationship continues to evolve. Again, I think it's a real challenge when customers go in and typically, you know, you might have a team that actually thinks this is a great project to take on, but then it gets passed to individuals who perhaps, you know, this is another thing they've got on their plate. I think across the board, procurement and all teams, it's critical to have CXO sponsorship for any of these projects. So it's a top-down directive. This is why we're doing it. This is why it's important. This is the substantial improvement it's going to make for us as a business. And this is why everyone needs to get behind it. Yeah,
indeed. Right, thank you for that. And so another big focus of this research is about AI, which obviously we just can't escape in our work lives, indeed our personal lives now as well.
Yeah.
You guys were very, very quick off the mark with AI, is my understanding. And unlike certain organisations that have been accused of using it predominantly for marketing purposes, I know from my conversations with Dan in New York back in June, I saw it with EPW, you guys have actually already got some meaningful use cases, and it's making a big, big difference. Are you able to explain some of the practical use cases you're seeing customers adopt today, and what impact that might be having on some of their buying decisions?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So there's, you know, obviously Gen AI and now AgentIQ, you know, it covers a myriad of things. And as you say, it's a much overhyped and overused term in terms of like people overstating what they've got in the market. You know, as you say, you know, we're a Vista portfolio company, and we're lucky to be able to leverage a lot of the expertise and beneficial kind of relationships that we've got as part of that kind of Vista ecosystem. So we were very quick off the mark, and we had a lot of support. You know, for us, I think agentic in particular really represents the ability to deliver best practice to mid-markets in a way that we've never done before. So, a key challenge with best-in-class contract and third-party management is the reality is it requires an enormous amount of low-value admin work.
Right.
So if you're a compliance-centric or regulated business and you're onboarding a vendor who's a kind of tier one critical vendor managing, key data, you may be dealing with like 400 field forms, dozens of different documents in order to onboard that vendor. That really, that work is boring. It's hard.
Yeah.
And because we're human beings, right, we tend to do those type of things slowly and not very well, right? So the perfect use case for agentic is really, again, thinking about these business outcomes is a very narrow scope. So giving agents the ability to be sort of non-deterministic and be able to control the outcomes, still with human in the loop, because people like that, but to give them a really clear idea of what they're trying to achieve. So for instance, onboarding a third party, a due diligence form, they will review that in seconds versus days or weeks.
Yeah.
And they will do it at a level of diligence and speed that your best person on your best day really could never match. So I look at kind of agentic in three different pillars. One is there's just straight FTE efficiency gains. So the people that would have been doing this work or the time from your existing team in doing the work, we're now freeing that up, and they're able to, and we can measure that. So we underwrite now every single subscription in Gatekeeper with a 3x guarantee on ARR. So purely from our agents, we'll deliver 3 times what you spend with us in FTE savings.
Wow.
And when I say FTE savings, no contract third-party vendor management team we've ever seen has got enough people inside it in order to really run it kind of best practice. So typically this is doing work that really wasn't done, and that created massive risk in the business. So number one, FTE efficiency gains. Number two, accelerating the speed of business, right? So if you think, why do you buy a product or a service? It's you either want to increase revenue or decrease cost, right? So if we are speeding up the ability to be able to achieve those outcomes, that's a massive competitive advantage in the marketplace. Yeah. And then finally is, the people that were really bogged down with this drudgery, this low-level admin work that they didn't want to do and they didn't do that well, are now freed up to do the high-value strategic work, which is the reason they got into the job in the first place, right? No one goes into procurement to look at 400 field forms and look at attachments, right? So that if you think about the value that brings to the organization, it is really kind of a radical improvement and an accelerant in how their business can perform. And soon enough, it's becoming, I think, table stakes. If you're not agentifying your business and accelerating the speed of business, then you're going to be at a significant disadvantage to others.
Yeah, indeed. And a couple of really interesting points. I mean, I think when I first read about both Gen and agentic AI, the first sort of business use cases I saw referenced were around contractual, and so it was a very obvious starting point for you guys to push on that as part of your offering. And to your point about you've got to get started. I mean, I've had this conversation with a few people of late about companies sort of standing back, not sure how to get started. A big part of what we're trying to do is help educate the procurement about where they can go, because not everyone's lucky to go to all the conferences that your teams go. I go to where best in class sort of use cases are being discussed. So I'm sure that's something people can talk to you guys directly about should they choose to do so. But you raise a really interesting point from my perspective as a recruiter there. All these historically boring, mundane, time-consuming tasks that took up so much of people's day, that you take those off the table, they've got all this spare capacity to engage the strategic. How well equipped now procurement teams in particular, maybe legal teams as well, to actually take advantage of that potential with the skills they've got? I mean, they've got skills to use the tools like yours, but also the skill sets required to use all this spare time, whether it be partnering with the business, for example, or with suppliers. What do you see so far with your early adopters? How are people getting on with that skills element of it?
I mean, the feedback initially has been pretty incredible. We did actually share some I hosted Lumen Week for the team just before we kind of launched. So we did a 90-day sprint, and then we launched our first kind of Lumen agents we've now got 35 kind of beta customers that are live using the agents, and now it's in for kind of full production mode as well. And some of the feedback from our customers has been, this is the most exciting thing I've ever done in business. So the feedback has been pretty incredible. I think that there is an enormous amount of things within the procurement and legal and finance and kind of risk areas that are projects that everyone has really wanted to lean into and get done. And especially in businesses that are fast growing, and even in businesses that are acquisitive, because most companies' data isn't perhaps in the best condition it could be. Yeah. And when you've bought other companies and you've bought their data challenges as well as your own, that can be a real problem. So I think we're a long way away from agentic actually optimizing work to the point where there's actually kind of spare capacity that can't be leveraged for these other high value strategic work streams. And I think in most businesses that we're seeing, the teams are super excited to go and engage in that work. I mean, how well trained they are to actually go and capitalize on that. I think that's an interesting thing, because the skill sets that people will need to hire for now, when essentially the lower value admin work is fully automated, is going to change.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting part of my work at the moment, having these conversations, because I've got procurement leaders and also people from the software side coming to me and say, okay, what is this landscape going to look like? And we're almost sort of making it up as we go along in a good way. I think to your point about these beta customers, that's really, I think, encouraging to hear that excitement, because there's a lot of noise out in the marketplace about people who are scared an agent's going to take their job, and that all these misconceptions. But actually, when you think about it in terms of augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, you recognize it's going to help you do your job better and deliver more value.
Yeah.
That should be the source, I think, a lot of excitement, and also a stimulus to people wanting to develop careers. I think a lot of people find it difficult to find time to enhance their skill set.
Yeah.
And whether it's through fear or excitement or whatever motivates you, there is a great opportunity now to do something different, and it's not as daunting as I think a lot of people think it is.
I couldn't agree more, Andrew. And I think a couple of things. One is when we launched the beta, first off, we thought we're going to have to get to the CFO here or the CX level, because the people actually doing this work will be difficult to essentially convince. Like there's that phrase, kind of turkeys vote for Christmas, not the next.
Yeah.
But actually, what was a really pleasant surprise, it was the people doing the work that were most enthusiastic. They were like, look, we're overwhelmed, and onboarding third parties properly, negotiating contracts really well, then being proactive and doing all the kind of, whether you're in procurement, sourcing really well, is there's so much work to be done there that everyone is kind of either not doing the work or doing it at a level where they're not really that happy with. And so agentic can really get everyone to true best in class without having much more kind of headcount. Might not be what you want to hear, but certainly doing the kind of more administrative sort of tasks. It's definitely a focus on the high value strategic work. And I think on that note, one thing that I see time and time again, and we beat the drum on this internally as much as we can, is you've got to put aside time in your day for Gen AI, for your own self-learning, for your own growth, right? This is not the kind of thing that you just work on in the evenings and at the weekend, or even if you're that interested. There is no doubt that it's going to transform every industry. And upskilling and understanding, it's becoming easier and easier and less daunting to be better at prompt engineering, to be better at being able to experiment, build your own agents. And the technology is as weak as it's ever going to be, and it's already pretty mind-blowing, right? So I would urge people to take time out of their schedule and actually put calendar notes in for the time they're going to spend on upskilling themselves on Gen AI. Absolutely.
I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of people don't realize the best way to learn AI is with AI, models. And I've done a lot of research. There's a few people that I follow and listen to the podcasts around, they're talking now about these real forward-thinking organizations that are AI first, such as from the very top all the way down, and people are giving time to experiment and to learn what's possible. and to start learning new skills like orchestrating clusters of agents. And that is a complex task and probably feels quite daunting initially. But once you start to think about it in terms of collaborating with it rather than thinking it as a software tool, or once you start to think about it, as I say, augmented rather than artificial intelligence, it creates a whole different sort of landscape.
Yeah.
And, the more you dig into it, the more you realize the sort of potential is unlimited. And most of us as human beings will probably only ever scratch the surface.
Yeah.
But it can help you do so much more effectively. And to your point about, lower headcount, this is a really interesting debate because obviously a lot of perception out there that it will take jobs. I think that's because we can see the jobs that will get taken, but we can't actually see the jobs that will be created yet.
Absolutely, yeah.
You always get that industrial revolutions. But in these AI first organizations that are really going for it, and they're often sort of mid-tier businesses that are more agile and the big enterprise players, their leadership are sort of saying, when I'm listening to on the podcast that I listen to, they're saying some teams will be smaller.
Yeah.
Because of what AgentIQ do. Other teams might actually be bigger because of their strategic importance. So it's not necessarily just a headcount reduction. It will change operating models. It will change sizes of departments, but it's not necessarily, the negative, fearful things that a lot of people are. I think in some cases it's stopping them getting started because they sort of head in the sand sort of mindset.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, brand new teams will be created. It's not even every week. I think we've got a tendency to just look through the lens of the existing org chart. And on the subject of org chart, that word orchestration you used, Andrew, is really vital, and I think it changes the mindset about how to kind of leverage technology to meet a common goal. The Gatekeeper org chart is now a mix of human and digital workers. So, our agents are kind of a mix in our org chart that do specific functions, and how that, and we need to see that org chart evolve and continue to grow over time in order to make sure that we're continuing to stay ahead and adopt agentic and drive our own business outcomes, right, as well as our customers.
Yeah, indeed. I think future procurement leaders will be like more like the conductor of an orchestra with you. You've got different parts of the I think human and agentic. So we talked about using the tools. What about actually buying AI tools? So, is procurement equipped with the knowledge and the mindset yet to buy that, or are you exploring that together? Really, you and your sales teams and the procurement that are buying it, are they having to shift their mindset in how they buy a tool like Gatekeeper?
I think so, and I think there is we do see a disconnect here at the board level in that you've got kind of the archetypical kind of chairman banging the board table saying, "Where's my 30% Gen AI efficiency gains?" Right? But then down at the grassroots level, it's like, well, you still got to have the AI policies, and someone's still got to say, we're happy to leverage this technology because, in order for AI to work, it's obviously processing data, and that data's got to go somewhere. So, at Gatekeeper, we've gone to great pains to have data sovereignty in all of the different areas that we operate. So we've got instances of Gatekeeper in Sydney, Europe, Canada, North America, and all of the AI operates in those different data sovereignties. But there is this disconnect between the aspirations for Gen AI, but then at a granular level, you still got to have a policy and the approval to actually leverage AI. And so that, we are seeing some organizations actually in some sectors that you might think might be more of a laggard actually leading the way.
Really?
And we're not really seeing great deals of patterns in particular sectors. It's more the individual and sometimes individual ambassadors that are really pushing the agenda internally. But I think people are going to have to get with the program because this train is moving and you don't want to be in the station when it's left.
Exactly. And on that, we've already touched on this. The first time you've raised the pace of change. So getting back to the whole sort of purpose behind this conversation about the way procurement buys software. So, a lot of software sales leaders complain to me about the length of a sales cycle. They'll often say 9 months and they say, well, maybe 12, So if you start a process and you're buying AI over a 9-12 month cycle, the change is frightening. What do procurement teams need to change in their evaluation and buying process to adapt to that new landscape?
So I'll bring it back, Andrew, here again to the kind of business outcome, and I think pair that with really focused kind of proof of concept. So, engage, the market is moving really quickly. We always try and put ourselves in the mind of the buyer as well, and it's a difficult challenge for them. As we've mentioned, the sort of marketing push around different providers, there's a lot of confusing messages in the market. We always want to go into the relationship with the customer as a partnership and be judged on our results. So that's where we have these kind of 3x guarantees on their ARR purely from our kind of Lumen agents, and how we focus on these proof of concepts with defined business outcomes and metrics that we're going to go and achieve together. I think, the traditional buy it in a year, deploy it in 18 months model is just broken in this world. I mean, we are now looking at delivering, time to value in our deployments in kind of days rather than weeks and months. We've got to be able to really control the scope, and that involves good stakeholder management and control the business outcome, and then go and hit those metrics together. And then once we've done that, the sky's the limit once they see the ROI. Yeah,
brilliant. And so in terms of the commercial models as well, because I mean, historically, so much SaaS has been on a per seat or per user license type of model. I think you've already, am I correct in thinking you've already shifted away from that towards things like usage-based, outcome-based, even value-based? Can you tell us a little bit about how you're doing that and what that means for the buying mindset as well?
Yeah, what's interesting here, Andrew, is we've always been on an unlimited user model. And that's because Gatekeeper came from my procurement consultancy, where we were trying to drive best-in-class contract and vendor management. And we understood that required collaboration across the business, right? You need the people that are managing these suppliers day to day, whatever department they're in, to take an active role in that contract in order to really drive maximum value. So price per user model inhibits the very behavior we're trying to promote. Now, that's fortuitously led us into the kind of agentic world in a very aligned way, because the price per user per month model in agentic is a sort of dead man walking, really. We have taken the approach to bake agentic into our kind of core pricing. So there's no kind of AI version of Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper is an AI platform, right? And an agentic platform. So LumenIQ is our agentic framework that powers everything. And if you buy Gatekeeper, you're buying an agentic platform at its core in order to kind of unify contract, third party and spend data in a single pane of glass across the business.
Wow. So really, you've been a trailblazer in that regard. And of course, made the point that as a historical SaaS business that's now embraced AI at pace and to real value and use case, you're leading the charge there as well. So in a way, you've sort of prepared yourself for this new era before you knew it was coming.
Yeah, it's fine. It's interesting because I kind of consider kind of like the 3 phases of Gatekeeper. Like, first off, around kind of contracts and vendors, we were saying to customers, like, what's your process? And we'll map it to Gatekeeper. And after kind of 4 or 5 years, we realized that people probably need a bit of help and they want to be told how to do things.
Right.
The next kind of 5 years, we were really, through a combination of our best practice workflow library, which is like 50 plus kind of workflows around everything you would want to do on contracts and third-party risk management, we were kind of promote best practice. But to my earlier point, the real challenge there is that they didn't have the people to manage best practice at a granular level, as a kind of a mature level, onboarding, negotiating contracts and onboarding third parties in the appropriate way. That's why I think that LumenIQ and agentic for us is the kind of Trojan horse of best practice. We're not only delivering best practice, we're not only delivering the mechanism to do the work, we're actually doing the work for our customers and then freeing them up to do what they applied for the job in the first place, right? To do high value strategic work that they actually enjoy.
Yeah, wonderful. So coming to the end of our time now, I think for those people who've been educated, I would say, by what you've had to say today, Patrick, about a number of different subjects around the commercial pricing models, the buying behaviours and the use of AI effectively in a traditional SaaS platform. If I can call Gatekeeper that might be unfair using the word traditional because you're obviously very innovative. People can get you via the Gatekeeper website and on LinkedIn, I assume?
Absolutely. LinkedIn, gatekeeperhq.com. Visit us on there. And yeah, Gatekeeper is the only unified contract and third-party management platform that really unifies that compliance-centric organizations around company-wide risk. And
you heard that from the CEO, so you need to get in touch with him. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you found that really interesting. I think it's part of this wider research I'm doing into how procurement buys software, and particularly with AI acting as a catalyst for change. So I hope you find it valuable. Of course, you can get me on LinkedIn as well and via andrew@everyday.com. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Patrick, thanks again. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Thank you, Andrew. Speak to you again soon.